She was forgotten, not because she had nothing to offer, but because the world stopped looking. She slipped into the background like so many others, unheard, unseen, invisible, not loud enough to be noticed, not broken enough to be rescued, just quietly surviving in a world too busy to care. But hidden beneath the silence was a story. One so powerful, so honest, so painfully human, that when it finally surfaced, it cracked open hearts across the world. She didn't rise with fame. She rose with truth. One voice, one story. And suddenly, the girl they once overlooked became the voice that millions were waiting for. Not because she fit the mold, not because she followed the algorithm, but because her pain was real. Her courage undeniable. This isn't a story about popularity. It's not about trends or titles. This is about what happens when the world's silence meets one woman's truth, and the ripple refuses to die. She didn't go looking for millions, but millions found her story. And after today, you'll never forget her again, they remembered. Her smile, its soft, gentle curve that once lit up every room she walked into. The kind of smile that made strangers feel seen, the kind that made broken people feel whole for a second longer. But somehow in the noise of the world, as the days grew longer and the headlines grew louder, her name started to fade. People forgot who she was, not out of malice, but out of the sheer speed of life. One day, she was a moment of magic. The next, she was a shadow in someone else's memory. That's the thing about this world, it celebrates you when you shine, but forgets you the second you dim. She wasn't a celebrity, not in the traditional sense. She didn't stand under flashing lights or pose for crowds. Her fame wasn't measured in followers or features. It was measured in the warmth she gave, the comfort she offered, the quiet resilience she carried in rooms where others only saw noise. People admired her for what she brought into their lives, hope, laughter, support, but they never stopped to ask what she needed in return. And over time, that took its toll. Because no matter how strong someone appears, even the brightest, soul needs someone to ask, "Are you okay?" But no one did. Not when she started drifting into the background. Not when her smile, once radiant, began to flicker like a candle running out of wax. Not when her voice grew quieter and her presence smaller. They saw the smile. They never saw the pain behind it. They never noticed the tears she cried when no one was watching, or the nights she stayed awake, wondering if she mattered to anyone at all. And slowly, the world moved on. The people she once held together found new shoulders to lean on. The ones she inspired found new muses. The moments she built with her presence became memories buried under new laughter, new stories, new names. But she remembered everything. She remembered what it felt like to be someone's first call, only to become an afterthought. She remembered the sacrifices she made, the birthdays missed, the dreams postponed, the energy drained just to keep others whole. She remembered how it felt when the calls stopped coming, when the thank yous ran dry, when the smiles she gave were no longer returned. They remembered her smile, but not the strength it took to wear it every day. Not the storms she survived just to show up for others. Not the silence she swallowed to keep peace where chaos lived. It's not the heartbreak she carried while healing. Everyone else. But here's where the story changes. Here's where the forgotten woman decides she won't be invisible anymore. Because one morning, after another sleepless night and another unanswered prayer, she stood in front of her mirror, not looking for beauty, not searching for flaws, but searching for herself. And there she was, still standing, still breathing. Still here, maybe bruised, but not broken. Maybe tired, but not done. That was the moment she realized something the world never taught her. Her worth wasn't in how many people needed her. It was in how deeply she knew herself. So she stopped shrinking, stopped apologizing for her emotions, stopped waiting to be noticed, liked, included. She began showing up for herself the way she used to show up for everyone else. She began writing. Again, singing again, dreaming again. She found joy in silence, strength in solitude. She started small walks at sunrise, journaling her pain, cooking meals that made her feel nourished. And then she started sharing her words, her thoughts, her wounds. Not to seek validation, but to let someone else know they weren't alone. Slowly, people began to notice. Her voice, once quiet, was now calm, clear, and powerful. Her story, once hidden, began resonating with those who had felt invisible too. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She spoke with honesty, and the right hearts listened. And as her words traveled, as her story began unfolding in the lives of strangers, something beautiful happened. People started remembering not just her smile, but her name. The name of the woman who gave when she had nothing left. The name of the woman who stood back up without applause. The name of the woman who didn't need a stage to shine only. The courage to reclaim her own light. She was no longer just a memory in someone else's journey. She became the reason someone else chose to keep going. They remembered her not because she was perfect, but because she was real, raw, human, and in a world so loud with performance, her authenticity was like a whisper that healed. The girl they once forgot. She became unforgettable. Not because she forced her way back into their lives, but because she walked into her own. Because she finally saw herself the way she once saw everyone else, with compassion, grace, and love. They remembered her smile, but now they remember her name too. Not as the woman who stayed silent, but as the one who rose in that silence. The one who turned her pain into purpose. The one who turned being forgotten into becoming unforgettable. And that was the beginning of her legacy. She gave everything. Not just her time, not just her energy. She gave her soul to people who barely remembered to say thank you. She poured her light into empty rooms, hoping it would help someone else find their way, even if it meant getting lost herself. She showed up day after day, when she had nothing left to offer except the pieces of herself she hadn't already sacrificed. And at first it felt worth it. The smiles, the warmth, the comfort of being needed. But slowly, what was once fulfilling began to feel like a slow unraveling. She wasn't just giving, she was disappearing. Piece by piece, dream by dream. Her life turned into a collection of sacrifices no one ever asked for, but everyone expected. She gave support when she needed it most. She gave second chances to people who didn't even deserve a first. She gave love to those who only knew how to take. Through it all, she told herself this was strength, this was purpose. That if she just held on a little longer, gave a little more, maybe, just maybe, someone would see her. But the truth? They didn't. Because the world rarely notices the one holding everything together until she collapses. And even then, it asks her why she fell instead of why no one caught her. She gave everything. And when the dust settled, when the noise faded, when the crowd she once held up walked away, she looked around and realized she had nothing. Not even herself. Her reflection had changed. Her laughter felt distant. The dreams she once nurtured had been buried under obligations that were never hers to carry. She'd become the hero in everyone else's story and a stranger in her own. And what stung the most wasn't the loss of things or people. It was the loss of identity. Who was she without the role she played? Without the mask she wore? Without the weight she carried for everyone else? There's a kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded and still unseen. That's the kind of emptiness she woke up to. The kind that made silence feel louder than screaming. The kind that turned a warm heart cold. Not from hate, but from exhaustion. She gave everything. And she got back silence, broken promises, forgotten birthdays, one-sided conversations. She got back whispers about how strong she was, as if strength was a reward for being overlooked. But here's where most people stop the story. Here's where they end it with, and that's why she gave up. But she didn't. Because even in the hollow shell of what remained, there was a flicker of something sacred. Her. Not the version the world needed, not the caretaker, not the fixer, not the rescuer, but the woman who existed before it all. The woman who once dreamed in colors, who laughed without worry, who felt deeply and loved fearlessly. That version hadn't died. She'd just been buried under years of self-neglect disguised as selflessness. And so she did something radical. She stopped giving to everyone else and started giving back to herself. At first, it felt selfish. The guilt whispered that she was letting people down. But with every boundary she set, with every no she spoke, with every moment she reclaimed, she felt her spirit return. Slowly, her hands stopped shaking. Her smile felt real again. Her eyes held fire, not fatigue. She wasn't rebuilding the old version of herself. She was creating a new one. One who didn't need validation to feel worthy. One who didn't need to be needed to feel loved. One who knew that giving wasn't supposed to cost her everything. She learned that love wasn't supposed to be sacrificed without return. That helping others wasn't noble if it came at the expense of abandoning herself. And most of all, she learned that nothing she ever gave was truly wasted, because even if people didn't see it, the universe did. Every act of love, every moment of kindness, every ounce of effort, it shaped her, strengthened her, refined her. She gave everything, still ended up with nothing. But now, she was building something better. A life that didn't depend on being needed, but on being whole. She was no longer the one pouring from an empty cup. She was learning to fill it first and give only from the overflow. And the world noticed, not because she tried to be seen, but because healing has a glow that attention can't fake. She started to attract people who gave back, who listened, who stayed, who didn't just take from her, but poured into her. She found purpose not in being everything to everyone, but in being true to herself. So no, she didn't give up. She gave differently. She gave smarter. She gave to herself first and finally realized that wasn't selfish. It was survival. And now, she's not empty. She's full. It's not because she needs anyone, but because she finally remembered what it feels like to be someone for herself. She gave everything and lost herself in the process. But in that loss, she found something even greater, the truth. The truth that real love doesn't demand your pieces, it builds your peace. The truth that giving is beautiful, but only when it includes you too. She still gives. But now, she gives from strength, from choice, from wholeness, and that is everything. She waited for days, then weeks, then months. At first, she believed someone would notice, that someone, anyone, would look past her smile, through the cracks in her voice, and realize something was breaking inside her. She dropped hints, subtle signs, silent cries, the kind of distress that doesn't scream, but hopes the people who know her best would feel it anyway. But no one did. Not because they didn't care, but because they never expected her to fall. She was the strong one, the dependable one, the one who always held everyone else together. So when she began to fall apart, the world looked away, not out of cruelty, but because they couldn't comprehend that even she needed saving. Every time she whispered, "I'm tired," they said, "You're strong, you'll be fine." Every time she paused to breathe, they pushed her forward. And every time she sat in silence, hoping someone would ask why, they changed the subject. She wasn't just alone, she was unseen. And it hurt, not the kind of pain that makes you cry, but the kind that slowly erodes your soul, one unnoticed moment at a time. So she stopped waiting, stopped expecting the rescue that never came. And in the stillness of that realization, she did something she never thought she could. She decided to save herself. It didn't happen overnight. It started quietly, small. Decision here, a tiny act of courage there. She woke up one morning, looked in the mirror, and didn't see the version of herself she once loved. She didn't see joy. She didn't see light. She saw a woman who had been carrying too much for too long. And in that reflection, a voice rose, not loud, not dramatic, but certain. It said, "No one's coming, but you are still here. That's enough." So she began. She didn't start with giant leaps. She started with surviving the day, making her bed, drinking a full glass of water, letting herself cry without shame. She stopped pretending she was okay, not because the world was ready to hear the truth, but because she was tired of lying to herself. Slowly, she peeled away the layers she had built to protect everyone else's layers of forced strength, polite silence, and emotional suppression. And what she uncovered beneath all of it wasn't weakness. It was a woman aching to breathe freely. The process was painful. Healing always is. There were days she wanted to give up, Nights she curled up, thinking maybe staying broken was easier than rebuilding. But even in those moments, something kept her going. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the quiet belief that her story wasn't meant to end like this. So she kept moving, kept choosing herself in small ways. She turned off her phone and chose peace over people-pleasing. She said no to things that drained her, even when guilt tried to creep in. She revisited her old journals, the ones from when she still believed in magic, and began rewriting the narrative she once abandoned. She picked up old dreams like they were fragile heirlooms and whispered, "I'm sorry I left you behind." And piece by piece, she returned to herself. She started to walk differently, not faster, not louder, but with intention. Her eyes began to shine again, not because everything was fixed, but because she had stopped waiting for someone else to fix it. She reclaimed her mornings. She reclaimed her voice. She reclaimed her right to be human, not perfect, not unbreakable, just real. She discovered joy in solitude, peace in stillness. And as she rebuilt from within, the world started to notice. Not because she demanded attention, but because healing can't be hidden. It radiates, it transforms, speaks louder than any scream. And when people finally asked, "Are you okay?" she didn't need their rescue anymore. She had already saved herself. The truth is, no one is coming. That's a harsh reality most people avoid. We grow up thinking someone will see us drowning and pull us to shore. But what if the shore is something we have to swim toward alone? She learned to be her own lifeline, her own safe place, her own reason to keep going. And in doing so, she found something no one else could give her: self-respect, self-trust, self-love. The kind that doesn't vanish when people leave, the kind that doesn't break when others disappoint, the kind that holds you steady when the world tries to shake you. And now, when others look at her, they still see strength, but not the kind that's defined by silence. They see the strength of a woman who fought for herself when no one else did. A woman who turned rock bottom into a foundation. A woman who learned that being saved isn't about being rescued, it's about remembering you were never powerless. To begin with, she carries herself differently now. Not because she's trying to prove anything, but because she knows her worth. She knows the price she paid to get here. And she knows that the girl who once waited for help became the woman who helped herself rise. So if you're listening, you're tired, and you feel like no one sees what you're going through, let this be your sign. Stop waiting. Start rebuilding. You don't need permission. Don't need rescue. What you need is already inside you: courage, fire, resilience. You are not broken. You are becoming. And just like her, you can choose to begin again. She wasn't just silent, she was silenced. And there's a difference. Silence is a choice, a moment of peace, a breath between storms. But being silenced, it's something deeper. That's when your truth is too uncomfortable, too raw, too real for the world to hear. That's when your story threatens the illusion others want to keep. And so they don't ask, they don't listen, they don't want to know. Because if they truly heard her, they'd have to face everything they chose to ignore. So instead, they labeled her quiet, reserved, mysterious. But she wasn't mysterious, she was muffled. She didn't stay quiet because she had nothing to say. She stayed quiet because every time she tried to speak, someone interrupted her. Every time she tried to express how she felt, someone minimized it. And every time she tried to ask for help, someone changed the subject or made it about themselves. Over time, she learned the cost of honesty. She learned that some truths are too heavy for people to hold, especially when they were the ones who caused the weight. She wasn't born silent. No one is. She used to speak with fire in her voice. She used to ask questions, challenge ideas, dream out loud. She used to tell stories that made people feel something. But the more she opened up, the more the world pushed back. "You're too emotional," they said. "Stop overreacting. Don't be so sensitive." And those words didn't just hurt, they rewrote her, made her second-guess her own feelings. They made her shrink, fold, disappear. She stopped sharing, not because she didn't want to, but because the spaces she entered didn't make room for her truth. So she became the listener, the fixer, the strong one. The one who held secrets for others while burying her own. And while people praised her for being low maintenance, easygoing, to chill, what they were really celebrating was how little space she took up. How easy it was to overlook her pain, but inside her was a storm that never stopped. Raging, not anger, not bitterness, just years of unspoken thoughts. Years of holding back tears in public bathrooms. Years of pretending the comments didn't hurt, the rejections didn't sting, the silence didn't burn. She smiled in rooms that felt like cages. She laughed when her heart was breaking. And the worst part, no one noticed, because she had mastered the art of pretending. Pretending to be okay. Pretending to be strong. Pretending to be the version of herself they liked best. And slowly, her real voice, the one that once spoke with passion and truth, faded into whispers she only allowed herself to hear when no one else was around. But here's the thing about being silenced. Eventually something inside you snaps. It's not in a destructive way, but in a liberating one. And for her, that moment came quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It was no big breakdown, no emotional explosion. Just one day, she looked around and realized the version of herself that everyone seemed so comfortable with wasn't even her. She had become a character in someone else's story. She was done playing that role, so she began unlearning. Unlearning the shame tied to her voice. Unlearning the belief that speaking up meant being difficult. Unlearning the conditioning that told her to be small, quiet, agreeable. She stopped rehearsing her words, stopped softening the truth to make others comfortable. She started telling her story not for pity, not for praise, but for power. The first time she shared what she had been through, her hands shook, her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. And when she finished, something incredible happened. Someone said, "Me too." It's the power of truth. It breaks isolation. It builds bridges. It lights fires in people who thought they were alone. And the more she spoke, the stronger she became. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply told the truth. Her truth. And slowly her silence transformed into strength. Not loud, not flashy, but unshakable. People began to see her differently, not as the quiet one, but as the woman who had the courage to speak even when it scared her. Her story wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always easy to hear, but it was real. And in a world drowning in filters and performances, real was revolutionary. She stopped asking for permission, stopped waiting to be invited into conversations. She created her own space, space where truth wasn't punished, where emotions weren't weaknesses, where being vulnerable didn't mean being broken, it meant being brave. And yes, some people still didn't get it. Some left, some mocked, some tried to silence her again. But she had already survived the silence once. This time, she wasn't going back. She knew now that her voice wasn't just for her. It was for the girls still hiding in the back of the room, the woman still swallowing her pain, the soul still afraid of being too much. And for them, she kept speaking now. When you hear her speak, there's weight in her words, not because they're loud, but because they're earned. Every sentence carries a past. Every pause holds a history. She is not just a survivor. She is a storyteller, and her silence. It didn't mean she had nothing to say. It meant the world wasn't ready to hear her truth. But she spoke anyway. She wasn't just silent. She was silenced. But not anymore. Now, her voice is her rebellion, her healing. Her legacy. They moved on quickly, as people often do. New conversations, new faces, new distractions. Life kept spinning, loud and fast. And the space she once filled became a blur in their rearview mirror. They didn't mean to leave her behind, not all of them at least. But the world doesn't wait for healing. It rewards momentum. It glorifies those who move on without looking back. So they did. And in the silence that followed, she sat alone. With her grief, her shame, her shattered pieces, and began to do the one thing no one saw coming. She started to stand again. Not with pride, not with applause, not in some grand moment of triumph. No, her rising was quiet, almost invisible. It started in the morning stillness, when she forced herself out of bed, even though everything inside her wanted to disappear. Started with breath, with surviving another hour, was choosing to try again, not because she felt strong, but because something deep inside her whispered, "You're not done yet." While they moved on and forgot her name, she remembered who she was. Not the brokenness, not the failure, but the girl who used to believe she could fly before life clipped her wings. She knew she couldn't soar again yet, but maybe she could crawl. Maybe she could stand. There's something sacred about rebuilding in silence. When no one is watching, when no one is cheering, when there's no validation. No spotlight, only you, your pain, and your decision to keep going. That's where the real warriors are made. She learned that healing isn't pretty. It's not linear. It's crying on the floor one moment and laughing at the sky the next. It's making progress and then collapsing into old habits. Forgiving yourself over and over and over again. But she stayed with herself, even when her hands shook, even when her voice trembled, even when her heart still ached from the absence of those who promised they'd never leave. She stayed, because this time she wasn't rising for them. She was rising for her. While they scrolled, she journaled. While they partied, she prayed. While they posted polished pictures, she sat with her pain and faced the truths she used to run from. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't shareable, but it was real. And real growth doesn't happen in front of crowds. It happens when you choose not to give up on yourself, even when no one else remembers your name. She found pieces of herself in the smallest things. A song lyric that mirrored her ache. A sunrise that reminded her the world still had color. A stranger's kindness that proved good still existed. She began building a life that felt like hers, not a performance, not a mask, but a space where she could breathe again. Slowly, her strength returned. Not the brittle kind that says "I'm fine" through clenched teeth, but the kind that lets you fall apart and still rise the next day. She wasn't trying to bounce back. She wasn't rushing to prove anything. She was learning to stand for real this time. They didn't see the nights she sat alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she mattered. They didn't hear the screams she swallowed, the dreams she buried, the guilt she carried for not being okay faster. But she did. She bore witness to every breakdown, more importantly, every breakthrough. She saw herself in full color, no filter, no edits. And what she found in that raw reflection wasn't weakness, it was power. The kind that isn't handed to you, the kind you earn. While they moved on, she realized she didn't want to go back. Back to being the version of herself that lived for their approval. Back to shrinking to fit their comfort. Back to bending so much, she forgot how to stand tall. No, she was becoming someone new, someone deeper, wiser, more grounded. Someone who knew what it cost to lose herself and vowed never to pay that price again. And though the world didn't celebrate her comeback, she didn't need it to. Because this time, the victory wasn't loud. It was internal, unshakable. They moved on, but she moved differently. She moved with purpose, with patience, with presence. And eventually, the world noticed not because she demanded attention, but because there's something magnetic about someone who's fought their demons and still walks with grace. She didn't return to their timelines. She didn't show up in their group chats, but she showed up in her own life, and that mattered more. Because while they forgot her struggle, she remembered her strength. She's not the same girl they left behind. She's not bitter. She's not broken. She's better. She knows now that being left behind was never the end of her story. It was the beginning of the chapter, where she finally became her own rescue. So if you're feeling forgotten, if it feels like the world has moved on without you, take heart. You are not behind. You are rebuilding. And sometimes, standing still in your pain is the most courageous move you can make. Sometimes healing is the revolution, and you're rising, quiet, messy. And Unsa might be the most powerful comeback the world never saw coming. She had no platform, no viral videos, no blue check marks, no millions of followers hanging on her every word. She wasn't trending. She wasn't a headline. She wasn't the girl people quoted in captions or tagged in hashtags. In a world obsessed with visibility, she was invisible. She didn't come from legacy. She didn't have connections. She didn't own a spotlight. But what she did have, was the truth. And that truth, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically real, would become her loudest microphone. She didn't rise with a fanfare. She rose in silence. While others were polishing perfect bios and curating flawless lives, she was living through things that don't make for pretty stories. She knew what it felt like to go to bed unheard. She knew what it meant to speak into rooms that applauded louder for lies than for honesty. And still, she spoke, not for fame, not for attention, but because she couldn't carry the weight of her silence anymore. Her truth wasn't glamorous. It was gritty, wounded, human. It wasn't written for applause. It was carved from experience. She didn't learn life from podcasts or panels. She learned it through heartbreak, through sleepless nights, through walking into rooms where she had to earn every inch of space she stood on. And every time the world told her, "You're not big enough, you're not loud enough, you're not enough," she whispered back, "Watch me." There's something unshakable about a woman who doesn't need fame to validate her voice. While others chase followers, she chased healing. While others built brands, she built herself. And while they posed behind filtered perfection, she stood behind truth that made people uncomfortable because it made them feel. It made them confront what they tried to avoid. For those who dared to listen, it changed them, because her words weren't borrowed. They were born. She didn't have PR teams, didn't go viral by algorithm. She went viral in hearts, in souls, in the quiet spaces where people felt seen for the first time. She spoke for the ones who couldn't, for the ones who still cried in bathrooms, for the ones who were told their story didn't matter because it didn't perform. But she didn't care about performance. She cared about purpose. And truth, she knew, doesn't need a stage. It just needs the courage to stand. At first, no one noticed. Now, her videos sat in silence. Her posts went ignored. Her name remained unknown. But still, she showed up. Still, she spoke. Because she wasn't building for fame. She was building for freedom. One day at a time, one truth at a time, one person at a time. And slowly, the right ears found her. The broken ones, the brave ones. The ones who weren't looking for celebrities, but for connection. And when the world finally turned to look, they didn't find a trend. They found a testimony. They found someone who had walked through fire and carried her ashes like war paint. Someone who never sold out for reach, but reached out to heal. They found depth, authenticity, grace. And suddenly, her lack of fame didn't matter. Her truth had already built something stronger than clout. It had built trust. She became a voice in a sea of noise. Not because she shouted, but because she told the truth when it was easier to stay quiet. She didn't follow what was safe to say. She followed what needed to be said. She didn't cater to comfort. She spoke for change, for healing, for those who still felt like they were too small to matter. And that's when they started listening. Not because she changed who she was, but because she refused to. The platform came. Eventually the views, the shares, the recognition. But it didn't change her. Because fame didn't build her, fire did. And that kind of voice doesn't get shaken by numbers. She knew who she was before the world paid attention. And when the spotlight faded, she'd still know. Her worth wasn't built on algorithms. It was built on impact, on scars, on survival. So to anyone watching who thinks they don't have a voice because they don't have followers, look at her. She started with nothing but honesty. She didn't wait to be picked. She picked herself. She didn't wait for the world to be ready. She told her story anyway. And in doing so, she reminded everyone of the most powerful truth of all. You don't need fame to be heard. You need courage to speak when it matters most. She had no platform, no fame, no spotlight. Truth. And in the end, that truth didn't just change her life. It changed others too. Her pain wasn't a weakness. It was power. But no one saw it at first. Not even her. Because pain doesn't wear a crown. It doesn't shine. It doesn't get applause or recognition. It shows up in the quiet, in the shaking. Hands in the eyes that blink back tears during a conversation that's pretending everything's fine. And that's where her power lived, not in the moments the world could see, but in the silent wars she fought when no one was watching. They thought she was fragile because she cried. They thought she was soft because she felt. But they didn't know that behind every tear was a story she survived, a betrayal she endured, a battle she never chose, but showed up for anyway. And that kind of pain, it doesn't break you. It builds you. It refines you, introduces you. Two parts of yourself you would never have met in comfort. She wasn't born with armor. She didn't grow up knowing how to fight. She learned through experience, through being knocked down and left behind, through getting her heart shattered in places no one could see. And yet, every single time without fail, she rose. Not quickly, not perfectly, but fully. She got back up when it would have been easier to stay down. And in that rising, she began to understand something the world had been trying to hide from her. That pain wasn't a curse. It was a mirror. It showed her who she truly was. It revealed the depth of her empathy, the strength in her softness, the fire that burned beneath her quiet resilience. They told her to be strong, as if that meant hiding how she felt. They told her to move on, as if grief followed a timeline. But she didn't want to hide anymore. She didn't want to pretend she wasn't hurting just to make others comfortable. She knew deep in her bones that her vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the birthplace of her transformation. The very thing that made her human, the thing that made her powerful. She stopped apologizing for her emotions. She stopped minimizing her struggle. She stopped dimming her light just because others were uncomfortable with its warmth. And in doing so, she began to reclaim her story, not as a victim, not as someone who barely made it, but as someone who turned her deepest pain into her greatest teacher. Her wounds weren't just scars. They were maps, proof of where she had been, proof that she had lived, felt, endured, and kept going anyway. You see, the world is quick to celebrate the victory, the comeback, strength, but it rarely honors what comes before the nights spent in silence. The mornings filled with anxiety, the moments of doubt and fear and overwhelming sadness, but she honored them. She didn't skip over them. She sat in them. She gave herself permission to feel what she needed to feel. Not the kind of strength that's loud and flashy, the kind of strength that whispers, "I've been through worse, and I'm still here." Her power didn't come from perfection. It came from persistence. It came from showing up broken and choosing to heal anyway. It came from walking through the fire and refusing to let it burn her spirit. It came from knowing that the pain didn't define her, but it did shape her. And that shape was stronger than she'd ever imagined. People saw her smile and assumed she was fine. They saw her laugh and thought she had moved on. But what they didn't see was the work, the inner battles, the nights she wiped her own tears because no one else was around. They didn't see the journal entries soaked with grief, the prayers whispered in the dark, the strength it took just to get out of bed some mornings. And that's okay, because she didn't need their validation anymore. Her healing wasn't for them, it was for her. She realized something powerful. Pain isolates, but it also connects. Somewhere, someone else was going through the same struggle. And when she began to speak her truth, not just the highlight reel, but the raw, unfiltered truth those people found her, they didn't come for perfection. They came for permission to feel, to heal, to be human. And she gave it to them. By pretending to be whole, but by showing what it looked like to rebuild piece by piece. Her story wasn't pretty, but it was real, and that made it beautiful. Because in a world full of masks, she chose to be authentic. In a world that told her pain was weakness, she turned it into her greatest gift. Now, when she walks into a room, she doesn't lead with her accomplishments, she leads with presence, with grace. The quiet confidence of someone who has been to hell and back and learned to dance in the ashes. So if you're watching this, and you feel like your pain has made you less, you're wrong. It hasn't weakened you. It has awakened you to your strength, to your depth, to your truth. Your pain is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your becoming. Like her, you can rise. Not in spite of your pain, but because of it. Because her pain wasn't a weakness. It was her power unseen. Sometimes all it takes is one story, not a speech, not a show. Just a truth so personal, so vulnerable, so honest it breaks through the noise and reaches a place in the heart that has long been locked away. She didn't have a big platform. She didn't have fancy words or polished delivery. But what she had was her voice. Shaky, nervous, almost too afraid to speak. But it was hers. And that voice carried something this world so often forgets. A story that needed to be heard, not because it was dramatic, it's not because it was perfect, but because it was real. She'd held it in for years. Tucked beneath smiles, swallowed between "I'm fine" and "don't worry about me." It was the kind of story that lives quietly inside people until something cracks open and the truth can no longer stay silent. And on that day, in that moment, she realized this was her chance. One story, one voice. One chance to be heard, not for fame, not for sympathy, but for freedom. Because there's something liberating about saying what you've always been. Too afraid to say doesn't change the past, but it changes you. The world didn't ask for her story. It never does. It's more comfortable when people like her stay quiet, when they don't stir the water, when they carry their pain behind the curtain and pretend it doesn't exist. But she was tired of pretending, tired of watching people like her suffer in silence, thinking they were alone, tired of seeing the strong ones break behind closed doors just because no one ever asked them how they were really doing. So she spoke not to be seen, but to be known, to remind herself that her life had meaning, that her story mattered. If it only reached one person, even if it only made one soul feel less alone, what she didn't realize then was that her story was not just for her. It was a mirror, a bridge, a light. The moment she shared it, something shifted. Not in the crowd, but in the people listening. They sat still. They leaned in, because her voice didn't demand attention. It deserved it. It was the voice of a survivor, a dreamer, a fighter. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. For the first time in a long time, she felt it. Someone was really listening. Her story wasn't the prettiest. It didn't have a fairy tale ending. It was raw, unedited. The kind of story that makes people uncomfortable. It forces them to confront the things they pretend not to see. But that's what made it powerful. It was hers. Fully, fiercely, unapologetically, hers. And in telling it, she gave others permission to tell theirs. Permission to feel without fear, to cry without shame, to speak without waiting for approval. You see, one story can ripple across generations. One voice can spark a revolution inside someone else. One moment of honesty can become the turning point in a stranger's life, and that's exactly what happened. Quietly, slowly, her story spread. Not because it was boosted or promoted, but because people felt it. They shared it in whispers and late-night texts. In conversations that began with, "You have to hear this." She had no idea her words would travel, but they did. Because truth once spoken has wings. She started getting messages from people she'd never met, from countries she'd never been to. Strangers saying, "Your story is my story," or "You made me feel seen," or "You helped me find my voice." Every time she read those words, her hands trembled. Not out of fear, but gratitude. Because it proved something she always hoped was true. That pain, when shared, becomes power. She learned that the loudest impact doesn't come from the people shouting on stages. It comes from the ones who dare to whisper their truth into the silence. Who speak not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Her story was more than words, it was a map. A guide for those still wandering through their own darkness, searching for proof that someone else made it out. And even now, as she reflects on that moment, that one chance to be heard, she doesn't remember the applause. She remembers the stillness, the weight of the room, the sacred silence that followed her last word, because that silence didn't mean rejection. It meant they were feeling it. They were sitting with it. They were changed. So if you're watching this and you have a story inside you, a truth you've buried because the world convinced you it wasn't worth sharing, listen to this carefully. Your voice matters. Your Your story matters. You don't need 1,000 followers. You don't need a spotlight. You just need one thing: courage. Because the truth is, you may never know who needs to hear what only you can say. You may never see the lives you'll change just by being honest, but the ripple always happens. She proved that. One story, one voice, one chance to be heard. And the world was never the same again. The world looked away. Not because it couldn't see her pain, but because it chose not to. That's what the world does when the truth feels too heavy. It turns its back. It scrolls past. It pretends not to notice. And for a long time, she thought that meant her story didn't matter. That maybe if no one was willing to look, maybe she wasn't worth being seen. But she was wrong. Because her truth was never about the world's permission. It was about her own. And no matter how many times the world tried to ignore it, bury it, silence it, her truth refused to stay hidden. It lived in her breath, in the way her voice caught when she spoke about the past, in the way her eyes told 1,000 stories without ever saying a word. She carried her truth everywhere, not like a weapon, but like a shadow. It was with her in crowded rooms. It echoed through empty hallways. And though no one ever asked, it waited quietly, patiently for the day she would finally let it speak. You see, the world loves a polished version, a survivor they can celebrate, a comeback story with a perfect ending. But that's not how healing works. That's not how real stories unfold. Hers was messy, unresolved, filled with scars that still stung when the light hit them a certain way. And when she tried to share it, when she dared to open up, people turned away. Some out of discomfort, others out of disbelief. And the worst part, some just didn't care. That's what hurt the most. It's not the pain itself, but the apathy. The way people can look you in the eye, know you're breaking, and choose convenience over compassion. But even in that silence of it, in that abandonment, her truth kept burning. It pulsed in her chest like a heartbeat. Whacked it, reminded her. You lived to this. You survived this. And no one can take that from you. So one day she stopped waiting for the world to be ready. She stopped trying to make her story easier to digest. She stopped shrinking the parts of herself that made others uncomfortable. She finally let her truth breathe. She told it like it was. No filters, no edits, no need to make it palatable. She spoke for herself, for the girl she used to be, for the woman who cried in silence because no one would listen, for the child who thought being strong meant staying quiet. And as her truth filled the air, something powerful happened. She began to feel whole, because truth has a way of stitching broken pieces back together, not by erasing the pain, but by honoring it. And in telling her story, she reclaimed her power. She was no longer the girl everyone forgot, no longer the background character in someone else's narrative. She was the author now, the narrator, the voice the world could no longer ignore. Some still looked away. Some still dismissed her. At this time, she didn't care, because her truth wasn't for everyone. It was for the ones like Hertha, ones who were told to keep it down, to move on, to just be thankful it wasn't worse. It was for the ones still carrying secrets like chains around their soul, the ones who needed to hear someone say, "I see you, I believe you, and you're not alone." Her story didn't go viral, it didn't trend, but it reached hearts, and that mattered more. It reached the quiet ones, the broken ones, the ones who had been told their pain was too much, their voice too loud, their feelings too dramatic. She became proof that truth, no matter how long it's buried, always finds the light in the world. The world had no choice but to notice. Because once truth is spoken, it echoes, it spreads, plants seeds in people who thought they were alone. It builds bridges between strangers. It starts revolutions inside souls. She wasn't trying to be famous. She wasn't chasing validation. She was simply done hiding, done apologizing, done waiting for someone to say, "Now is the right time," because the right time is always now. The right voice is always yours. And the right story is the one you've been too afraid to tell. The world looked away, but she didn't. She looked inward, faced her pain, held her truth, and walked straight through the silence into a freedom she had never known before. So, if you're really listening, ask yourself this. What truth have you buried because the world wasn't ready? What part of you have you silenced just to keep the peace? And what would happen if, just once, you let it speak? She did. And everything changed. She wasn't chasing millions. Not of dollars, not of fans, not of views. That was never her intention. She wasn't trying to build a brand or become a name that echoed in every trending search bar. All she wanted was to tell the truth, to speak what had lived in her chest for years, to release the weight she'd been carrying since the day life taught her that silence could feel safer than honesty. In a world obsessed with clout, she didn't want attention. She wanted freedom, and yet without ever asking for it. Millions found her story. It started small. A quiet video, a raw post. No lights, no edits, no perfect background music or slick transitions, just her voice, trembling slightly, layered with truth that had waited far too long to be heard. She uploaded it and walked away. No expectations, no promotional plan, no viral dreams. She just needed to release it, to stop holding it all inside. But the thing about truth, real, unfiltered, deeply human truth is that it travels, finds the people who need it most. Even in the darkest corners of the internet, at first, it was a few comments. Then a few hundred views, nothing spectacular. But then came the messages, from strangers who felt like soul mirrors, from people who whispered, "This is my story too." The kind of responses you don't just scroll past, the kind that make you pause, exhale, and realize, this is bigger than me. This isn't just a story, it's a reflection of all the voices that never got their moment. All the hearts that were waiting for someone to say what they were too afraid to admit. She watched it unfold in awe. Not with arrogance, but with humility. Because she wasn't performing, she was revealing. She wasn't selling a version of herself that looked good in pixels. She was offering her reality, and that kind of vulnerability. It's rare, it's unforgettable, it's magnetic in a way algorithms can't explain. People didn't follow her because she was popular. They followed her because she was real, and that made all the difference. Millions began to lean in, not because she screamed the loudest, but because her quiet honesty cut through the noise. In a digital world full of filters and facades, she became a window. A reminder that behind every perfect feed, there's a story, it's a struggle, a silent battle no one talks about. And through her, people began to feel less alone. She wasn't the most beautiful, the most famous, the most eloquent. She was the most authentic. And authenticity, when paired with courage, becomes unstoppable. Her story didn't go viral because it was dramatic. It went viral because it was true. And truth, when spoken from the soul, is contagious. It spreads like wildfire, igniting something in others that they forgot they carried. She still remembers the moment her notifications exploded, when thousands turned to hundreds of thousands, when hundreds turned to millions. But what stayed? With her wasn't the number on the screen, it was the impact. The girl who messaged saying she hadn't spoken to anyone in months, but after watching, she finally called her mom. The man who'd lost everything, but found hope in her pain. The mother who finally told her child, "I believe you." Were the milestones, not the likes, not the views, but the real lives that were touched, the healing that began, all because one woman decided her story was worth sharing even if it scared her. Even if she thought no one would care, and with every message, every comment, every shared moment of connection, she understood something deeper. She had never needed millions to listen. She just needed one person to believe. But in daring to be seen, she became a lighthouse for many. Not because she had answers, but because she had truth. She wasn't trying to save anyone. But somehow her story became a bridge others used to save themselves. She never let the numbers change her. She stayed grounded, rooted in why she started. This wasn't about influence, it was about impact, about legacy, about giving people permission to tell their own stories, scars and all. She didn't create to impress, she created to express. And that difference? That's why people kept coming back. because she reminded them that it's okay to hurt. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to take your time. In the end, her biggest reward wasn't the audience. It was the healing hers, theirs, all of it woven together by one thread, Nesty. She realized that in speaking her story, she wasn't just setting herself free, she was unlocking others too. So no, she wasn't looking for millions, but millions came. Anyway, not because she chased them, because she chose to show up.